All right, Hamilton Souther, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. The founder of Blue Morpho, I finally get to talk to you.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, I founded Blue Morpho many years ago. It's been a real pleasure and quite a journey.
Now it's crazy where I get to finally put a face behind everything I've experienced and the connections you have blessed me with because I've been down to Blue Morpho a couple times and you guys now have a new camp.
Yeah, I mean, we're back at the lodge where we started from 2005. We were at another location for a period of time, and we decided to come back to really our home and start again from here. And it's been really incredible. Been an incredible journey, especially since last October and the tours that I started to be on again.
Now I bring up new camp because you guys went in there with some brand new construction, correct?
Yeah, we decided that it was time to really make this, our serious lodge, and so we've started work on a series of changes to the lodge. We're remodeling the bungalows. We've added a swimming pool. We've added a lounge area, Wi-Fi area. We've brought in electricity, and we're doing some electrical work now, putting in ceiling fans and some dimmable lights. And then also in the process of building a new ceremonial house, which should be about 3 times the size of our current one.
Comparable to Heliconia, how big is it?
Uh, About 1.5 times the size of Heliconia's. So for the listeners, we're talking probably 6,000 to 7,000 square feet roundhouse.
Because we could fit 50 people in Heliconias comfortably.
Yeah, I'm looking to fit 70 to 75, maybe 80 with all of us. Yeah, it's time to take it to another level and have amazing ceremonies. And we've started this project around sustainable food development that goes right alongside the idea of sustainable medicine practices. And so I wanted to create an opportunity for more people to be able to come meet us and to create a space that we could have obviously much larger groups, but also a different price structure. Over the years, the business side of Blue Morpho required, especially with inflation here in Peru, the increasing of prices to match costs. And I wanted to find a way to try to lower that. And so when I came back and started managing Blue Morpho again, I really looked at how we could try to find savings and pass those on to our guests. And ultimately, we're going to have the ability for people to come at a much cheaper price. This year, we've lowered prices. And then by next year, we should have a whole nother price tier for people who will come and also volunteer and help us in the growth of this sustainable food development. We consider it a green mission, something super important for the future, absolutely necessary for the growing third world economies and their growing populations. And so we're really looking forward to being able to invite us to come now on each tour, obviously for a reduced price, and then to be able to help us in the development of that project.
Now, this sustainability mission, is that kind of what really brought you back down to the jungle to start, working hands-on with the people again?
Yeah, I mean, there were really two reasons. One was I had a severe motorcycle accident in 2010. And in that accident, I broke my hip and dislocated the right femur and was really handicapped for a number of years after that, to the point that it was very hard for me to sit in a chair. I couldn't really sit in an ayahuasca ceremony, for 4 to 6 hours in a chair. So I spent a lot of time in rehabilitation, and then for one more time around that merry-go-round, I ended up, after being rehabilitated, having an accident again and breaking most of my ribs on the left-hand side. And so after both of those injuries, it took me a while to rehab enough to be able to come back. And so part of it was rehabbing to that point. And then during that time, that gave me a lot of time to be on the floor thinking. I spent a lot of time on the floor doing practices to rehabilitate, and it got me thinking about the future, not just medicine practices, but also overall sustainability and what that meant to a much larger agenda. And I was researching more stats on that for many years. I was just focused on medicine practices and the people that we were helping. And I started to get this idea that if the collective group was not also opening up to changing the approach to the way we were treating the environment, there wasn't going to be an environment in which for us to have medicine practices. So it started to seem pretty crazy or even nonsensical to think about healing hundreds or thousands of people a year, only to have the whole collective end up creating a situation of, a disaster. And so I thought, okay, well, we need to expand our agenda to this larger sustainable mission and branch out and share that network with others and NGOs and governments, third world governments, and really expand this idea of how we could utilize secondary forests and utilize the land masses in these areas for sustainable food development. And so once we got the project going to a level that it was time to implement it, it turned out that I could come back all at the same time. The health, the personal crises with the accidents, and then the ability to be back in ceremony, and also having the project to the point of launching it and bringing it to the public was all kind of coinciding again synchronistically. And that's what brought me back.
I think it's important that we tell Big Eddie Gonzalez to quit trying to get you on the motorcycles from here on out.
Yeah, I think he tries. He tries to get us on motorcycles for sure. But I've given that up. I've realized that my motocross career is finally over, and I turned 40, and whatever was the extreme athlete in me left somewhere in that transition from 37 to 40 in the accident. Finally left, like the need for extreme everything, including extreme ayahuasca, kind of all turned into this idea of a more holistic life vision and a holistic view of what we were doing as a collective group and as a company and as a business. And so I agree that unfortunately the motorcycles, even though it was a deep passion of mine, have to stay away, and it's more important to maintain health and the physical well-being and now stay focused on our medicine practices again.
Now, beyond what you're doing at the retreat center and with Blue Morpho, how do you plan on going about kind of, helping save the lungs of our planet in the Amazon jungle?
Well, we started this project called One Energy Global, we being a think tank and business team that I put together through like-minded people that had come to Blue Morpho. Mm-hmm. And the goal of One Energy Global, it's a blockchain platform. It's to create a space for people who are green thinkers to come together and share in the ideas and ultimately create for-profit ways to be able to sustain the land. And so what we saw was that there was a tremendous amount of secondary forest in the last 20 years. The predation on the tropical forests around the world have been severe. And what's left behind is land and plants and huge forests, but they don't have what would be considered traditional forest wealth in them anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not hardwoods and oil and things like that. Those have all been extracted out of the forest, and now it's where people have cleared it, and now it's grown back, and it's not the same ecology as a primary forest. And so our goal was to focus our attention on those secondary forests as a place to be able to create economic incentive, and then, like I say, sustainable food development through the use of those lands. So we focused our innovative ideas on how to reimagine those parts of the forest and how we could find a way to extract value. I think the hardest part in green and green thinking is that without it being profitable, it's almost impossible to get large-scale backing for it. And so to bring the green agenda and then a for-profit motive is also really hard because the typical profit agenda isn't green. And so to try to work all of those intricacies out was pursued over a couple of years that our business team looked at, and we finally came to, like I say, to some proprietary ideas that would give us this ability to start to transform the land and transform these forests that had already been degraded and already been interrupted by humans and their use of them, and then give them new value. And that's where we are now. We're looking in the next months to launch the first pieces of land, and I'm out here now on our land at the lodge, creating the changes to make that possible.
How do you feel about working again with Maestro Alberto, your sidekick? Does it just give you the jitters every single day?
It's incredible, I mean, when I met Alberto, it was a dream come true. I found a real medicine man. I found somebody who was, for me, from movies, right? There were only movie characters that kind of had this quality of capacities that he and Julio had. And I was looking for that, And so you could go to like Star Wars themes or Lord of the Rings, themes, or any movie that has to do with the idea of beyond just the scientific concepts and agreed concepts of reality. And so to meet Maestro Alberto was unbelievable. And then to get to study with him was, even beyond unbelievable. And then to get to come back, I mean, it's mind blowing because I never really had a vision of the true future of Blue Morpho. I knew that we were building this medicine center, and I knew that the goal was to help as many people as we could and to share with them the beauties of ayahuasca medicine and the different plants of this forest. But I didn't really know where that would take us, you know? And so to come from on such a journey over 16 years and be side by side, shoulder to shoulder in ceremony again is unbelievable joy. I mean, I've always said it's an honor to be in that role. I think it's an honor that anyone would listen to anybody else or share in their ideas. And then to be in a medicine space with so many people is just even a greater honor. I mean, when we're in there together and the medicine is really strong and, you know, people are having eye-open visions everywhere and they all, you know, call it 5D, rainbow reality, total visionary space, you know, these extraordinary experiences that people normally don't have. To get to facilitate that with Alberto is, you know, better than a dream. It really is. It's fundamentally amazing. And the quality of his practice has, you know, I think only grown over the years. He's just so profound in ayahuasca shamanism and his capacities in managing a ceremony. And it still blows my mind. Every ceremony, he'll be in the space of the visions and of the spirit, already helping the person before they're asking. Right before I see they need it, he's already there. Yep. Without even getting up from his chair. And then the next day, the report is that he just came to them and helped them. And I was able to see it, and the speed and quality and understanding that he has of that space. I mean, he has merited through an unbelievable amount of practice. How many people in this world have studied from the, you know, before the age of 10 and now is over 60 and has drunk ayahuasca thousands and thousands of times, well over 4,000 or 5,000 times in his life. So, you know, it's just an unbelievable amount of experience and incredible joy, just incredible joy to sit with him. And it's an honor. I mean, it's an honor to sit with him every time. To get to listen to his Icaros and be in ayahuasca and share that with others is just fundamentally amazing.
Working with him is truly magical, and feeling just his presence, let alone kind of what you're talking about, where there's this telepathic connection he shares with you in the room and how he kind of goes about his practice. It just forces you to give him a hug every single time you see him, just because of what he's able to do for a singular person, let alone an entire collective.
Absolutely. And he's been so generous in the medicine. I think one thing that isn't really shared a lot is that it was really taboo in his culture to share the medicine with foreigners. It was not considered okay or appropriate. And, you know, he and Julio stepped outside of that taboo and decided to open up and accept us. And I came with real desires. I wasn't faking it. I really wanted to learn. I was unbelievably fascinated by what they had studied and learned over the years and what their indigenous knowledge was. But it wasn't common to share that. It was okay to share ceremonies with people, but to actually teach them and to take them into the realm of the shaman and to take them into that visionary space and then openly share the medicine at that level with people that weren't from the local culture really was taboo. And I think it shows an incredible amount of his character, and credit to him that he was willing to do that and see that it was going to be important for him and also for us in our lifetime to do that together. And I, you know, forever grateful. And I think that that's one of like the real hallmarks of Julio and his existences both were to open that whole space up. And then, you know, the ramifications of that and the influence that has had on now thousands of people, and then the connections that has impacted in their lives because of the willingness to do that, you know, really touches a huge amount of the planet. And I think that that's a you know, tremendous gift that he gave all of us.
Is he truly aware of kind of the darkness and what's really going on in the United States right now?
I don't know. I think he's just aware of darkness in general. I don't think he puts a geographic location to it. Mm-hmm. He thinks that people are really sick. Mm-hmm. He thinks that illness is spreading, and, you know, that he doesn't have exactly an explanation for it, you know, mm-hmm. but he just sees it as a form of darkness and as a form of I don't know, predation, I would say. You know, it's always very simple with him. It's always, is it light or is it dark? Mm-hmm. Is it good for the environment or is it bad for the plants? Is it good for the animals or is it bad for them? It's really mm-hmm. simple. And, and there's very little comparison in that. And so I think he's just, pretty impacted by the idea that so many people from all over the world that have come to see us represent a small subset of the population, but a selected part of that population representing a much greater population that has these issues, these illnesses, these problems, and these experiences of darkness in their psyche and in their soul, and trying to liberate themselves from that. And I think his focus has always been 100% the medicine itself. So he's been sharing that idea with as many people as possible, to turn to the medicine, to turn to the light, to turn to love, to turn to the heart, to turn to his understandings of divinity and infinity and the universe, and to see through these, obstacles or delusions that people have. He tells me stories all the time of individuals. So he tells me of a group that thought God was money. And how he showed them what his understanding of God was, and how the next day they agreed that God was not money anymore. And he talks about others that, thought that sort of they were just the pure state of ego. They were just the wholeness of their ego, and that's all there was. There is no spirit. There is nothing beyond us. And then their experiences of how he showed them how the whole jungle was alive. And then he likes to throw in how they usually purge top and bottom, and how to really intense time taking it all in, He likes to, there's a little bit ayahuasca experience, and if you haven't, come have it, But he has that vibe of telling those stories about how he awakened those people to those understandings. And I think that is key to his understanding of the rest of the world.
With so much time spent between you and Alberto, do you guys communicate between each other's dreams ever?
Yeah, we dream each other often, typically in times of need. When you have a telepathic communication with somebody and it's been there for a very long time, it's kind of like calling them on the phone. You don't interrupt them if you don't have to, typically. I mean, when I was in training, Julio and Alberto used to mess with me all the time just to prove it, especially when I was doubting. So I could be halfway around the world in a restaurant and they would just crush me. And all of a sudden I would be seeing ayahuasca visions trying to eat pizza or something, and have to walk outside and like tune into them and be like, what do you guys want? Like, what's up? And they'd be like, ha ha ha, we're just saying hi, And then I'd come home and see them, and they'd be like, you were in the pizza restaurant and we were coming and messing with you, And so after a while, you start to really respect each other in that space. And when we need of each other, we definitely call on each other and we dream each other. But we can also call each other just from normal waking state. If we go into a trance or into concentration, we can contact each other. And, I remember the first day that Julio and Alberto took me into that state. That was when they agreed to teach me. That night that they actually got together, they never told me that they had this meeting. I found out about it when a documentary was being filmed on us, and Alberto shared the story. But that night, which was in, 2003, 2002, 2003, deep in the forest together, sitting there together, they had finally agreed to teach me, and they took me in this ayahuasca vision to this point that was just first utter light and rainbows, and then a tunnel of white that ended in death, and then absolute black. And instead of dying, the lights turned back on inside me. I mean, it was terrifying and also unbelievably uncomfortable. But when the lights turned on inside me, there was no actual physical death or even spiritual death. It felt like death to the point of just blacking out and then immediately on. Right? Like if you turned a light off and turned it on without that, like not even a second passing, as fast as you could possibly do that. And when that happened, Alberto and Julio were in my head. They were literally in my mind. And it was the first time I had ever had multiple people in my mind at the same time and talking, and not me making it up, not like me imagining my family talking to me or me imagining something. This was, they're really talking to me. And so I thought, no, this can't be. So I thought to myself, Julio, I'd really like a cigarette. And he literally handed me a cigarette without saying anything. So I just thought it. Julio, I'd like a cigarette. He reaches into his pocket and he hands me a cigarette. And I went, oh my God, this is real. This is really happening. this is real. He's in my head. And then he starts laughing, ha 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 ha, physically, as I was thinking those things. And so I knew he was hearing me, and then it's just continued since then. I mean, that started my training with them. And now, over a decade later, there we are still experiencing that in ceremony together. And again, what a gift.
Now, this past November, we all lost a brother, one of my former maestros. We lost Malcolm. Did Maestro Alberto have anything to say prior to that regarding Malcolm's energy, where it was going, or did he have anything to say post after Malcolm passed? Has there been any conversation regarding it?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot. I think what hasn't really been told about Malcolm's story is that Malcolm asked to be relieved of all of his duties associated with us and ayahuasca almost a year before he passed away. So the entirety of 2018, he wasn't in the medicine practices with us. And that was his own desire, and he asked for that. And he had been asking me for a while for that. And we were looking for a way to reorganize because he held such a central role. And so we were really working together to make that possible. And finally, at the beginning of 2018, we had found the right managers who could come in and take over for him. And some of the other people who had been apprenticing and learning had grown up in the space enough so that Malcolm could step away. And we really thought that that was a movement that would be really positive for him and something needed for us as a business group and as a community. And, from that point on, we don't exactly know what happened with Malcolm, specifically, right? But we saw Malcolm start to have different kinds of emotional difficulties. And he had a really, I don't know, by later in the year, a really negative view that he had taken on the rest of the world. From his travels around the world, he had traveled all over, and he had this really dystopian vibe about what the world had become and what it had done to the traditional peoples of the world and what the modern world was continuing to do. And we saw that Malcolm was entering into a pretty dark space, and we tried and offered to help him on multiple occasions, but he wasn't interested in coming back. I offered Mal at least 100 times to come drink with me, be in ceremony with me, purge, change, but he had made his decision. And I think the other thing about Mal that a lot of people don't know is that he was unbelievably insistent on maintaining his own decision, period. So he had his decision, and that ultimately expressed itself in taking his own life, which for us is just an unbelievable tragedy, an unbelievable loss, an unbelievable tragedy. But he insisted on that, and that really is, the mark of him as a shaman, that he never gave that up to anybody else. It was his decision. He carried it with him to the absolute end. Alberto's teaching is that you have to be decided. And so we were worried about Mal, and we were trying to work with them to, find resolution and peace and come to a really good place. But he wasn't, open to that at that period of time. And then afterwards, it's just been a continuous spiritual communication. We called him to ceremony. We've talked with them. We've, understood why he's made his decision in the way that we can as shamans, and we've come to peace with it. But it's, been a brutal and, tough trajectory in that sense. I mean, it lost a brother, lost a friend, lost a business partner, co-shaman, co-maestro, and something that we had, not really foreseen as something that was going to come at that moment to that decision and those actions. And so it was a real big shock to us.
Someone who had helped so many people, including myself. I'll never forget my fifth night of ceremony, my second year with you guys. It was a tough week for me. I battled. No, sorry. What am I thinking? This is my first year, fifth night. And I had a tough week. I battled. And sure enough, all it took was him coming and just tugging on my big toe, pulling that last bit of negative energy out of me, sent me home higher than a kite, just lit up. And it was someone who could always kind of see through me with his stoicism. He was a very stoic individual, someone who was prideful and like you were saying, his decision was made. And he was a very strong-willed individual. And I remember when he said that he had reached a place where his energy cannot rebound, I knew right there, because what Mao would say is bond, and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. He complained to me about being extremely tired, that he felt, incredibly burned out. And I also think, sometimes for shamans, the hardest thing to do is to be able to receive their own medicine. It's easy to give it once you learn how, but sometimes it's really hard to be able to receive those lessons yourself. And the further you get into the practice, the harder it is to weed out the next lessons. At first, it's really easy. You just go into an ayahuasca ceremony and you have your whole life to purge.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 ceremonies into the game, you've purged 1,000 ceremonies. Now what's left? And you're looking and you're digging and you're finding stuff that's been holding on the whole time. Mm-hmm. And it is true that in the Amazon, lots of shamans don't make it. It's not that ayahuasca shamanism is just a medicine form that for the shamans is easy or, really that survivable. In fact, I think most shamans don't make it until, late into the ages like Julio, into the late 80s or early 90s. I think most of them perish much younger than that. And it's part of the nature of the volatility of the ayahuasca space and the intensity of that space. And to survive it for a long time is, incredibly difficult. And so I think that that's also important for people to know that, receiving all of the lessons is not easy. And the shamans are in a position where they have an incredible amount of inner strength that they've developed, and they have to get past that to be able to be open to those next set of lessons. And in the case of Mal, Mal took his decision with him to the grave, and that's a decision that we can't judge. It's his decision. And like I say, we as shamans don't believe in taking that decision away from somebody, although we do consider it a tremendous tragedy and loss.
Is there the turnover with shamans, no matter how long it is that because of the darkness you're having to see in other people through ceremonies, or is that the darkness you discover within yourself?
There's both. I mean, there's really three main categories that you come up against. One is your own experience of your own consciousness that's isolated to your own ego and the process of processing that and dealing with it. The second is the groups and being in a continuous field. I always thought it was funny that, and like ironic funny, not funny, haha, but you do all this work to purge and cleanse yourself to become a master shaman. And then as soon as you do, literally just 5-10 feet away are people purging all of that stuff onto you. So you didn't get it very far, right? You got it out of your own body, and now you're helping others, but it's all the same stuff. And so there it is again. It didn't really disappear from your life. And now it's not just yours in you with a shaman helping you. Now you're the shaman helping hundreds and hundreds of people a year. So you have hundreds of quantity of that at any given time. And then also in the world of the shamans is this collective shamanic tribal system that is still in existence today. It's part of the collective consciousness. It's part of mythological consciousness. And within it, there is the light and the dark. And that can come from anywhere. And it presents itself in different kinds of shamanic engagements and difficulties, battles, warriorship that happens. And different lineages have different interactions and difficulties with that at times. And in the case for us in the Amazon, since we were really a mixed race group of traditional people with, foreigners involved, there was a lot of antagonism to us. And you get bombarded with that. The people who are in the space who don't want you in the space try to remove you from the space. It's just like a massive multiplayer online video game where there are other people from all over that just don't want you in that game. Mm-hmm. And so you're getting, in a sense, targeted and hit by all of this spirit energy, and that's coming in all different shapes and forms in the conscious, your own consciousness, the collective consciousness, the group consciousness. And so you have to be really vigilant and really careful with your energy. You have to be really continuously cleansing and continuously dieting, continuously practicing to be able to maintain that solidarity and withstand it, And there are in many lineages apprentices who perish. There are many shamans who die along the way. And it was not considered uh, automatic that you would survive apprenticeship by Julio or Alberto. When I asked Julio if a white person could, if a foreign person could become an Amazonian shaman, he said, if you survive, first, if you can survive it, period. Well, that puts death right on the table. Mm-hmm. Death is now immediately on the table. It's if you can survive. Well, what do you mean if I can survive? It's not like going to a college and then just quitting. It's if you can survive this. And then he said to me, we all bleed red. Like, it's not the color of your skin. It's whether or not your blood's going to survive it for real, and you may perish. And it was unbelievably sketchy for me at that time to hear that in my early 20s from a guy in his 80s who had been living it his whole life. But it's the darker side of shamanism. It's the more intense side of shamanism. You hear a lot about just the medicine and the beauty and the light, but you get there by this incredible purge and ultimate mastery over these darker forces so that they don't keep you from the medicine. Like you're saying, Malcolm grabbing your big toe and having that last bit come out of you and then opening up to that space of light. When you've tasted the darkness inside those spaces and in your own consciousness, you know. And I think it's hard. It's not easy. It's really not easy. And the true practices are incredibly intense.
Through your work, could you kind of break down your understanding of karmic law?
Karmic law. I think karmic law is more self-created than externally created. I think it's really easy to externalize the idea of karmic law, that there's a greater force that's putting that karma on you. But I think if you look at the collective consciousness, the mythology in that consciousness, the light and the dark, the duality, the place where you have your freedom and then the place where you have that sort of super egoic compression over you, I think that's where the karma shows up. And that expression of karmic law is, I don't know, I think just fundamental to the idea of de facto fundamental reality, that this isn't a place to mince the argument or the concepts. Tree is tree, energy is energy. Scientists know energy as electrons and strong bonds. Shamans know energy and visions and vibe and feeling it. They're talking about the exact same thing. It takes a different shape and form in our consciousness. Our consciousness has been barely explored. The mind has only been aware of its own consciousness for an unbelievably short period of time in human history. And so I think karmic law gets externalized when really it's a completely internal experience, and then ultimately shared amongst groups. It becomes part of the ideology, and then they hold you to it as well. So not only do you have it just in yourself, but then you end up finding that the other people bring the karma as well. And I think it's also a surrender to destiny. There's this difficulty and challenge to survival itself. It's not easy to be alive. You can tell a lot of stories about the struggle associated with that, but ultimately we've all been born way beyond for a reason. The being birthed itself is axiomatic. Being of consciousness is of great importance, period. And human life is, as well as all life, I think fundamentally miraculous. I don't think there's a way to understand it beyond that. We have no notion of human life somewhere else other than Earth itself. And so, you look at galaxies and you look at outer space and you see these tremendous distances and you see these stars, and then there's the solar system and there's this Earth, and we are of this Earth. And, I think that is truly the essence of destiny. The fact that we were born and are living, the fact that we are of consciousness and self-aware, the fact that we're sharing ideas and part of the collective, the fact that all of our ancestors have already moved on, they've already lived and died, and that they've been more ancestors than people alive that have moved through that transition. I think that's really where we have to just surrender to the understanding that life has difficulties associated with it. The karma expresses itself in those difficulties. We move through that together, and ultimately I hope that we can come to our own resolution. And I do see that as the path of destiny, or the path of life itself.
That was a true Hamilton Southern answer right there.
Thank you.
How has your work shaped your understanding of the afterlife?
I just don't believe in it. I don't believe there's a
Ooh,
before or after life. I just don't. I believe
just a
there is life.
just a during life.
It's just a during life,
Yep.
and life doesn't end in what we call death. I think of death as a birth. I think of a continuous series of births, not the culmination in a cycle to an end. And so, there was this guy called my father, and he did this action that's called intercourse or sex. And who knows how many times in his life there was a sperm that went somewhere else that wasn't me. And then all of a sudden I existed, I was born. And then I see that from all life comes life. So the jungle is constantly decomposing and rebirthing itself and decomposing and rebirthing itself. And I see that in that life for us, they go through these different stages of development. And I look at our position in this life and of this energy, and I don't see it as individualized or personalized. I see it as being of the earth itself. And so the earth birthed me, and so I just don't see why the earth would kill me. It just doesn't make sense to me. I see that as a mythological story. It's a way for us to culminate the notion of someone's end. We mentioned Malcolm and the idea of, perishing in the physical form, but the spirit continues and moves on. Julio has been, deceased for many, many years. He's still 100% part of our mesa. There's this continuance that isn't after what? There's a transition. Yes, there's this moment where life was one kind of thing. You're of this consciousness in this isolated way. I think you shed that isolation and you become part of a collective. And in that collective, the collective represents a we, and the we is something that we would know as spirit. And when we're as body, we experience it in I am, and it's all self-reflected. And for many people, incredibly scary, And so I think that shuts down our ability to see this continuous blossoming of life. And so I think when Earth is done, when we're done, in essence, with the body, what moves on is a continuance of life itself and consciousness itself. And I think that the isolation of the body is free. I kind of think of the body, and I like to think of it in other terms than, just human. So I think like, well, there are these caterpillars that become butterflies. So maybe the body's like the caterpillar form, and what comes next is the butterfly. And in that meaning, to me, it's beyond Earth itself. It's a galactic, universal form, and something that I think is potentially exciting and not so scary.
Do you think that's why we're able to tap into past life recognition? Is it because it's just a seamless cycle, whether we egoically think of death the way we do?
Yes, I do. I think it is seamless. I think the notion of revolution and reincarnation is a way to try to understand that seamlessness. Mm-hmm. I see it as a field itself of life. Okay? And linguistically, we are fundamentally incredible at separating ourselves. But that's only in linguistics. So I can sit here and tell everybody how separate I am from the jungle around me, but it's fundamentally not true. I'm breathing the jungle around me. Oxygen's coming out of the leaves all around me. It's becoming me. I'm exhaling it to them. They're becoming it. We're all becoming it together. And so I don't see it as so isolated or individualistic like we represent so much in our linguistics. And I think ayahuasca is an incredible way, and the sacred plants are an incredible way for people to see beyond that veil. I never really felt like that veil was the whole truth. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a way to understand early on in my practice that it was a question of linguistics, but now I really do see it that way. It's a form of thought, and it's a form of the mind itself. And when you alter the nature of the mind with the plants and with the ceremonial experience, the intraweb of energy becomes visible. Mm-hmm. The what people call spirit becomes visible. The spirit of the plants and trees and insects all around us become visible. Mm-hmm. The experience in ceremony of the entire forest around us taking rhythms and syncopated rhythms to the shakapas themselves. At first, it all sounds like just sonic chaos. Mm-hmm. And then pretty soon in the ceremony, it's not just us, the forest joins in. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't had that experience, it's incredible. It's incredible. It's like a a multi-species orchestra forms between everything, and then how those end up tying into our consciousness synchronicities and the realizations people have. You know, it's magical, it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's just every adjective you could put to it of fantastic. You know, how is that separate? I just don't see it that way. So I've had so many experiences of and continuous, and we'll have them next week, and we'll have them, you know, the very next week, of how all of this is interconnected. That I just see that seamlessness of life, and that how we are, I don't know, continuously created. It's not even just reincarnated once, two, three, four, five times. It's literally more than we know how to count.
With all you've seen, does anything surprise you anymore?
I think the only thing that surprises me is why people are still so cruel. Like, there's so much cruelty that to me seems to not help anything. And that surprises me. It surprises me to maintain the nature of that cruelty, whether it's a family member to another family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a romantic couple, whether it's a country to another country. It doesn't matter. It's just fundamental cruelty. And I've never understood why that's necessary, and it's surprising how strong that is as a response to life and a response to each other. You know, I think that people need to spend way more time in their imagination and outer space, and see that then there's only Earth. You can count it if you want. It's one Earth, or it's Earth, and we're here within the Earth, and there's no more of us. And so why be cruel to each other? It just doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's surprising when I see it in different kinds of ways. And then I'm positively surprised when I get to learn anything new. You know, whenever I have an experience of learning something new, I'm always positively surprised, because it's literally new. You didn't know it before, and then all of a sudden it's there and it doesn't go away. The transference of that knowledge is available, and that's always a pleasant surprise. I recently got a new dog. I had 2 German Shepherds, and my last German Shepherd passed away in December, and I just got a new dog, and he's an amazing, amazing being, and he does things that blows my mind every day. The way he learns, and the way that we work together it's not training him, it's working together. It's the way we work together for him to learn and for me to learn at the same time is just phenomenal. And that's surprising. In the moment when it happens, you know, the light lights up and you can see it. And that's been really, really amazing to form that bond and to have that connection with another, you know, being from another species, but that's super intelligent and capable. And that's also been, you know, awakening and really surprising.
How do you feel the impact of marijuana is having on the Western world? Because as some of us know, you and Christian were holding cannabis ceremonies at your place in Colorado. Did you kind of just throw that in the wind to come down to back down to Peru, or do you still plan on practicing cannabis ceremonies in the future?
Well, I certainly plan on doing cannabis ceremonies in the future. The question to me around the use of the plants is always around legality and being in a place where you can legally use the plants, simply because for me personally, and it doesn't have to be that way for somebody else, but if I'm going to be in a state that's psychoactive and, you know, quote unquote tripping, I want to be comfortable. I don't want in the back of my mind a little thought ghost saying, you know, this might not be okay, or you could get caught or something like that. And so I've never recommended to people, especially if they're novices, to enter into a space where you have any doubt about your well-being. You should be comfortable in the space that you're in. You need to know that the people that you're with are supporting you, that, you know, if it's a group of friends and your brothers have your back, if it's a group of shamans like us, you know, from our professionalism and years of practice, that we're there really for everyone's good. You know, to be in that space where you feel like you can really have that experience. In my case with cannabis, it started when I moved back to the United States after the motorcycle accident, and I turned to it as a form of medicine. I looked at it for literally medical marijuana and for pain treatment. I was having very advanced, very difficult form of sciatica. And so the sciatic nerve damage in my leg was extremely agonizing. And so I was looking for a non-narcotic source of pain relief. And I had developed this practice called modern shamanism, which is an online course that teaches how, if you're a person in the modern world, to learn and practice shamanism. And so I didn't just, after years of ayahuasca and only working with ayahuasca and the plants, just jump into use of marijuana. I took it really seriously and was, concerned that I could do something to affect or negatively affect all the work that I had done in ayahuasca. And so I really set the space and really set it up utilizing the practices in modern shamanism to find the head medicine and the head medicine spirits of the plant and go on that initial journey. And what I found was that there was, like all of these psychoactive plants, many gateways that you could go into in cannabis, and that many of them were known, some of them were still unknown, but that the visionary space was, literally wide open, and that it really required the need of that intention of medicine, the intention of that practice for medicine, knowing what kind of spirit and energy you were trying to meet from the plant, where in the collective consciousness you were with the use of the plant. And so I immediately turned it into a shamanic practice. So it wasn't just consume this to get high, it was go into a shamanic state and seek healing in this trance that was being supported by the plant. And it was phenomenal. And I wanted to know that it was strong enough to be able to create purging. And when I was face deep in a toilet, that answered that. I knew that it could make me purge.
Without eating pizza?
Yeah, exactly. No pizza. Like literally in trance, and then all of a sudden, like, oh man, I'm going to the toilet. This is making me purge. And then, purging just like ayahuasca. And when I had that connection and knew that it had that power, I knew that we could use it for shamanism. And so I started to develop a kind of practice that we could share with others that we called Cannabis Shamanism. And then that took us to Colorado and the work that we were doing there. And then, we've moved now down here back to South America. So for me, during this period of time, I've suspended that practice while I've been working with ayahuasca again in San Pedro again. But I think we'll, as soon as we're in an area where we can, we'll continue to do retreats associated with it. I think it's an unbelievable medicinal plant. I think it's completely misunderstood. Just simply, I think it is completely misunderstood. The plant itself has, I think, literally nothing to do with the cultural understandings that we have in the modern world of the plant. And unfortunately, it was just not studied and understood in those ways, just like almost people don't know anything about ayahuasca. I think the difference is that it was named as a drug, and then it had, a number of decades of severe education about it in a way that only represented its negativities. And I think all medicinal plants have a positive and a negative side. And so if you just hearken on the negativity of it, you can create a really horrific story associated with it. And I think it's simple to see, where people become unmotivated, where they become antisocial, where they no longer want to be a positive element in society. That's one expression of it if you go there. But if you use it for the purpose of shamanic medicine, that is the opposite of what you find in the plant. You find an awakening, and you find a kind of relaxation you didn't have before. And it's not just in being high and then being at a party. It's on the contrary. It's a transformational effect that then makes you more relaxed in other areas when you're not using the plant. It changes you fundamentally in a way like the other medicinal plants that have this lasting effect where you have been positively transformed and affected from the experience. But I think it needs to be used ceremonially. It needs to be used in that shamanic context, in that indigenous context, and that just isn't part of the modern world's understanding of it. And so what happens is just use, not use with purpose or use with even understanding. And, that can lead anywhere.
Can you explain how all plant medicines are just a bridge?
Yeah, because you're tapping into consciousness. And we have this idea of my consciousness, like this is my consciousness. Well, there's 8 billion my consciousness. And then there's all these animal consciousness. And it's been proven. I mean, it's been proven in all these different sea animals. It's been proven in all these different land animals. And so there's this idea of this field of consciousness. And in, modern psychology, the idea of a collective consciousness. What's not understood is how you bridge to it and how you tap into it and how you start navigating it, how you start really surfing that consciousness. And that's really where the shamanic comes in. And the shamans have been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. I mean, it's probably, I don't know, 40, 50, 60,000 years they've been doing this. Mm-hmm. So, modern religious practices go back 5, 10,000 years. We're talking about practices that go back much further than that, and having real archaeological and historic evidence for that. And so the bridge is first an intention that you're bridging to something greater than yourself. Mm-hmm. So right there, you've already shattered the idea that it's me, that mm-hmm. it's my consciousness. You're saying, no, I am bridging to something that's beyond the me and the my consciousness. And then after that, the plants function in that way to facilitate a state of consciousness that is altered and different to your normal state of consciousness. Very much like you go from a waking state to a dream state to a waking state, but you still have legitimate, real experiences that you could talk to someone about in the dream state. And the visionary state is like that. And all I can say is that you see and you travel. So, I think the first point with that understanding that blew my mind was when I went to temples outside of Cusco where there had been in stone carved huge, 20, 30-foot monoliths of stone, heads of elephants. Mm-hmm. And there are no elephants indigenous to South America. They're Africa and Southeast Asia. And there are these elephants carved. And then I talked to the local shamans and they're like, yeah, we travel all over the world and we see all these different animals. So they didn't have the same names for them. And then they found out Latin-based names for them. And they're like, yeah, those are elephants, those are tigers, those are lions, those that kind of snake, this kind of snake. So they had this idea of being able to connect. And I think that was the first point of that bridge that I saw. It's like that people knew of animals that was not part of their history, that was from other parts of the world at a period of time when there was no way they could have traveled physically to those areas. Mm-hmm. That shows the real literal understanding of that bridge, and then I think the other part is the idea of being in the altered state, having that state have trance associated with it. Mm-hmm. And that's measurable. That's scientifically measurable. Being in your waking state of consciousness and then being in a theta state of consciousness or an alpha state of consciousness. And it has to do with just names to different brainwave functions. And all of the shamanic rituals associated with the plants, no matter where you are in the world, have some kind of rhythmic expression that engenders and induces that trance state. So it's not just I take this substance, I take this plant, and then I act normal. It's I take this substance and I enter into a meditative trance state, and because of that meditative trance state induced by the rhythms, the chants, and the plant itself, I'm then able to make this bridge to consciousness itself. Mm-hmm. And I think that's limitless. I think it's universal. You can go anywhere. Once you learn how to navigate, you navigate through intention. It's where you place your focus. So if you want to end up on the rings of Saturn, you place your focus on the rings of Saturn, and pretty soon you're on the rings of Saturn looking back at Earth. If you want to go into yourself and try to work on something, you place the focus on the desire to release sadness or pain, suffering, loss, and all of a sudden you're truly within yourself and purging those things. If you want to go meet the plants, you'll find yourself in a vision in the jungle itself, and the plant will start talking to you. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing with animals, and it's literally that literal. I know that sounds really odd and foreign to someone who hasn't had the experience, but if it sounds intriguing and interesting, find a way to have it. It's worth it. It's worth expanding your consciousness and expanding that opportunity, walking into that opportunity, releasing the fear around it, and recognizing that this field of consciousness, this collective of consciousness, moves way beyond just the human. Yep. To understand that it is in the plants itself, and the power of the consciousness of the plants is overwhelming to most people. Literally vomiting and defecation level of overwhelming.
Yep, absolutely. And I think anyone who's had the experience, that's I've learned to welcome it having been down quite a few times, I've learned to just bring it on, baby. Let's get rid of some stuff. Let's do it, man. I love it.
Exactly. Have
Oh,
fun. Like embrace that notion.
yep, absolutely. And it's a different kind of vomitivo, man. It's a it's a spiritual kind of connection with your body when you are vomiting out energy as opposed to not just physical.
Absolutely. I think that's the most amazing thing is when somebody starts to have that physical release and they see it. And what comes out is this non-physical stuff. So the body is in a purge, the body's constricting, the stomach feels like it's being squashed. People say that they feel like their jaw is unhinging, their mouth is getting bigger and bigger and bigger than ever possible, like a snake's jaw unhinges. And then what comes out of them is pure energy, and it can be of any shape, form, style, nature, and way. And as soon as it's out of them, they feel so much better.
I'll never forget. And Sammer really helped me out with this, helped me understand it. For the like 18 months prior to coming down my second time, I had this pain in my left lung, just west of my heart. And one of the nights, I actually vomited up this black, hard, like coin out of my body, and
Wow.
you heard the actual hard kerplunk in the bottom of my puke bucket, and it made no sense. But since then, that pain is gone in my lung, and it's like, well, was that just a physical form of energy, or what the heck could that have possibly been? I could only imagine what you've seen come out of bodies.
Oh, I've seen lots of things come out of bodies. The biggest mystery of me for me is that in a San Pedro ceremony, I heaved with my face inches from the ground on my hands and knees, and I looked in my vomit, and there was an alive wasp. Physical, 100% physical to the eye, not just energy, a true alive wasp. That's the most mind-blowing experience in that form I ever had. I have other experiences where Alberto showed me things that also were unbelievably mind-blowing. Like I got bitten on the heel by a spider that was potentially lethal once. And instead of using anti-venom, Alberto told me that we would drink ayahuasca together. I thought he was insane. And then he literally called the ayahuasca to pull the venom out of me. And I puked 2 drops off the end of my tongue and gone. And no illness, healed. The spider bite healed, and just 2 little holes in my heel the next day from where the spider had bit me on my heel. To to see those experiences, have those experiences, you know, mind blowing, just mind blowing. Energy, physical, yes, all of it at the same time. Physically manifesting energy, absolutely. And out of people, oh my God, out of our guests, anything and everything you want to imagine. In the National Geographic article that was written about us, the writer talks about purging snakes and then looking in the bucket and seeing a physical snake, a little tiny physical snake. Other people have mentioned purging much larger things than that. I remember one guy who thought he had nothing to purge. I thought it was great. On the third night, he actually purges what to him is a 3-foot cockroach. It says it crawls right out of his mouth. Like, oh my God. I don't even want to
That's insane.
Cockroach, man. Yeah. And then after that, he said all of his fear was gone.
Yeah.
That his fear and his anger and his temper was quelled. And he felt incredible and reawakened to life itself, and has been grateful ever since. But that wasn't a physical manifestation. That was a visionary manifestation, but it was physical to him in the moment that it was happening. And we can see that in ceremony happening. You see the stuff coming out of people, but it just looks like mythology. Mm-hmm. It looks like all of mythology at the same time coming out of people.
One of my craziest years with you guys was in 2011. I had a major shoulder surgery where they used a cadaver's knee ligament to tie down my clavicle.
Oh, wow.
I was still having, no, but the surgery went fine. I live in the land of the Mayo Clinic. We're good. in 2016, I was still having some nerve issues. And this is my second year coming down to see you guys. And I go to Maestro Alberto. I tell him of my issue. And he said, no problem, no problem. Tonight we focus on it. We let the medicine work. And sure enough, we put some focus into it. And sure enough, that night, Maestro Alberto comes through to me. And he's like, Nick, tonight is the night you become one with that dead dude's knee ligament in your body. Because it's been a foreign element for 5 years and you just didn't accept it. It's like you were spiritually rejecting it subconsciously. And so that night, sure enough, we connected. And since then, man, I was never able to do this,
Wow.
without it hurting. And since that night, my third ceremony with Maestro Alberto, I'm good to go. And that was obviously 3.5 years ago, but it just kind of shows the power of me getting out of my own way and Alberto knowing that that's what needed to happen.
That's a miracle. That's just a fundamental miracle to me.
Yep. And it's physical. It's not something where I go down to help myself with seasonal depression. No, like they're like my big toe, the same one that Malcolm pulled, that was one that I stubbed really bad and the pain just never went away for like 8 months. And sure enough, I was able to just cruise around on it since that happened. Gosh, there's so many other issues where this past year I was down in Costa Rica in ceremony and I'd always had issues in my right hip. And sure enough, it stemmed from my gut. And that kind of and I discovered that and I've since been good. But like, I wanted to ask you what your knowledge is regarding how ayahuasca can recalibrate the gut biome, our second brain.
Oh, I just think it just does.
Mm-hmm.
It's considered a purgative and it resets it. Just like it resets the physical, head brain,
Mm-hmm.
it resets the gut. It's considered this incredible cleanse that leaves you new,
Mm-hmm.
literally reawakened, literally new. And I think the best example I have of that is an early guest, really early in the early 2000s, had serious gut problems, so much so that he had to be within 30 seconds of a toilet for 30 years.
Mm.
He could not be anywhere, longer away from that. So think of how controlling that is to your life, to have to be within 30 seconds of a toilet. And he had lived like that. And I remember in our second or third ceremony, he gets up, wobbling on his feet, says he has to go to the toilet, and takes 3 steps, says, oops, I didn't make it, kicks out his leg, is wearing like, traveler pants, the kind of like nylon-y kind of pants, and drops 2 balls of feces that looked like camel cud, literally the size of grapefruits. And they're physical. This is no joke. These things come out of him for real. This is not diarrhea. 2 camel cud sized grapefruit chunk lumps roll out of his pants. He leaves them on the floor. We have helpers. We carry him to the toilet. He finishes it in the toilet. And the next day, healed. The next day, absolute gut reset. No longer any problems with the gut. And to the day, from what we know, same continuous state of healing.
Incredible. Can you explain to me, Hamilton, so I never believed in anything with the Hindu religion, and Ganesh comes through to me, and then different time, I never knew anything about Thoth, and he comes through to me. Is that just like an astral connection to the universe that comes through with the medicine being the bridge? Or can you explain these things that I've never even thought about, let alone why are they coming through to me?
Well, again, we're going back to the collective, and we go into the collective consciousness, and part of human consciousness is this collective mythology. Think about right now how many people know of Ganesha and how many people are praying to Ganesh. How many people are praying to Shiva? How many people are praying to Jesus and Buddha and all the different Buddhas? So they're being prayed up in the collective consciousness. Think of the people that know of Thoth or other kinds of deities. And so the deities have been part of our collective consciousness for tens of thousands, if not longer years. They're part of our ability to tap into something that's beyond just us. Some of them may be our own creations. Maybe like the modern day superheroes from comics are like that. Maybe someday there's going to be a whole bunch of worshipers of Superman. I mean, there's already a designated religion of Jedis. So, maybe at some point people will be seeing Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader in their visions that never heard of those stories, Who knows? But I think that in these mythologies, we've had contact with them. We know they exist. They're in the collective, and you can now go and find them. I mean, much smaller scale. I remember in my very early apprenticeship in the first months thinking, is this real or is this just in my head? Is this real or is this just in my head? Those kinds of ideas. And I remember seeing this continuous vision with the shaman I was working with. It was something I'd never seen before. It was this little creature. I had never seen literally anything that looked like it. Never, nothing. It's not part of my mythology. I had no reference for it whatsoever. And then one day he hands me his ceremonial pipe, and carved into the ceremonial pipe is a carved image of that figure. I could not believe it. So it was the first time in my life I saw a carving of something that I had only seen in vision, that I only had reference for in vision, coming after. And so the only thing I could think of is that was part of his consciousness. We're in ayahuasca together. We're tapping into the collective together. And so he's working with that being, and that being now becomes part of my consciousness as well. And so there's how many people in the Hindu religion, how many people in the Buddhist religion, how many people in these other expressions of the idea of worship and the connection with these sources and these deities, and then you having an experience. And then in our ceremonies, we have people that come from all over the world, and we also open up what we call infinity, or the infinite, which means just everything. And we feel like we have the power and capacities to navigate and surf that without having to put limitations on that, so that the entire collective consciousness is open to us, and that then we can navigate through that, whatever it is that we need to. And so I think if you have that intention to be opened up to that totality, then you can have the experience to come across these other beings that, may not be super important to you or of deep connection with you before that ceremony, but in that ceremony, you end up connecting with them. I remember the first time I met the Hindu deities, they blew my mind in ceremony, just blew my mind. They were just pictures and effigies and temples and stuff and archaeological sites in my life before the ceremonies. And when they showed up, the power and the energy that those parts of the collective consciousness have were stunning, just stunning. I mean, I didn't really work with them very much. They weren't part of our collective so much in medicine. I wasn't, typically calling on them in ceremony or singing their ikaros or invoking them. But when we did run into each other, it was always so impactful. The scale and the size of the amount of energy that they represented was, a magnitude that's hard to explain. It's like trying to measure the sun, just such a magnitude.
Having experienced the geometric wormhole, do you think plant medicines have played a major role in the construction of pyramids and where they are on our meridian grid?
Yes, I think plant medicines have a huge role in the entire formation of modern consciousness. I think it's only recently in history that there's been the idea of isolating chemicals and giving them specific names in their isolation. Modern chemistry is very young science. And so I think humans have been eating sacred plants and visionary plants pretty much nonstop for the entirety of our existence of the planet itself. If you were putting the planets together, there's a number of plants that are not as sort of sophisticated in the preparation like ayahuasca. Ayahuasca, you have to combine a number of plants together to make the combination take you into that visionary space. But mushrooms, for instance, different kinds of cactus, for instance, just require eating them. And how easy would it be to just go pick up a mushroom and then, just blow your mind? And then if you had any linguistic skill, even if it's just point and grunt, if you had your mind blown by something, you would probably show your buddy, right? We've been a collective group. We've lived in, however you want to describe it, tribes or groups or troops or collectives, just like other primates, just like chimpanzees or gorillas. They live with their buddies. You know, they live in their family groups. We've been living like that forever. So it'd be really easy to point to that thing and be like, no, that thing kills you. Point to that thing and just go, head blown. You know? And then, so I think we've been you know, consuming these plants and expanding our consciousness with these plants forever. And it's only recently that there's been such a crackdown on the use of them and the understandings of them. And I mean, I understand that there's been probably some very good reasons for that as well, in terms of social stability and the growth of the populations and urban centers and stuff like that. But I think, again, it has led to a tremendous misunderstanding of the psychomagical, psycho-religious experiences or magical religious experiences of these plants and their importance to the formation of our consciousness and the continued evolution of consciousness.
Yes. And now I've heard the answer before, but I want listeners to hear it. You had mentioned that multiple plants are mixed together to brew the ayahuasca magic. How could you explain how our ancient ancestors came about mixing these quote unquote random plants and coming up with one of the most powerful brews mankind has ever experienced?
I got to go back to Alberto on that one, because I asked him, you know, and Alberto told me that in the ancient history of us as people, there was a period of time where humans, plants, and animals all spoke with each other, and they spoke a common language, and that the plants told the people what to mix and how to mix it to be able to experience the medicine of the forest itself. And I don't have any reason to doubt that. The understandings of the people and their connection with the plants and the shamans, it goes beyond identity itself. And the plants become them, and they ingest the plants. It's not just look at the plant. It's not just take an imprint of its leaf. It's ingest the plant and have an experience of their consciousness with that plant. And in the case of ayahuasca, the vine is called ayahuasca, and typically in our part of the jungle, the leaves of a tree called chacruna are used, and chacruna has the visionary properties, and the ayahuasca has the means to deliver those visionary properties. And what I mean by that is that the human body creates an enzyme that breaks down dimethyltryptamine, which is in the chacruna, if you drink it orally. And the ayahuasca vine has an inhibitor in it that inhibits that enzyme in the moment that you drink ayahuasca, and it allows you to have an absorption of the ayahuasca, and then the ayahuasca and the dimethyltryptamine from the chacruna. And the ayahuasca itself then has an MAOI, and we know that that's an uptake inhibitor in the brain, which then leaves the visionary compounds in the brain for a longer period of time than they would be there naturally on their own. So you have first one aspect of the vine making it possible to have the experience, and then you have another aspect of the vine giving that duration, that typical 3 to 8, 9, 10 hour experience. And that variation in time has a lot to do with how the brew is made and how much of ayahuasca versus chacruna you put into it. So that can be, based on the shaman and their recipe, have a lot to do with it, but it's also individual.
Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't to you. Okay, so do you think the human beings are doing the bidding for the plants?
I've asked the question of why the plants want to help people at all. Like, why do they even care? They have no need to. In the visions, the plants are not always very kind to humanity in terms of what they say. Like, I remember the plants saying, like the trees saying, ha, 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 look at the humans, don't know we're here, walk beneath us, talking amongst themselves, chatter, 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 never looking up and seeing us. Oh, they look at us, they call us a tree, they don't know we're here. Ha, 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 ha. We know them, we hear their thoughts. Those kinds of comments. And I came to understand that when I asked the medicine, now again, going to that idea that the plants don't just represent just medicine, just light, right? When I went to the medicine of the plants, they said that we're just plants, and without you, we can't practice our medicine. So we have this medicine, we have this capacity, but there is this symbiosis between us where the shaman is receiving the medicine and then learns how to create the sound and have the mobility required and necessary for the plants to practice their medicine. And the shaman acts like a gatekeeper and an intermediary between the plants and the people themselves. And all I can think about that is that you have a drive. You were born with some kind of impulse and a drive. So why wouldn't the plants have a same impulse and a drive? If they have a capacity, why wouldn't they want to share it? Dogs want to please. They have an impulse and a drive. Your pet has an impulse and a drive. So the plants do too. They have a desire to survive. You see these trees that to survive take these incredible forms that aren't just a tall straight tree. Like that's a desire to survive. I see vines go 20, 30 feet horizontally to find another place to go vertically where there's more sunlight. What taught the plant to seek that location in that way? Right? They have this drive. And so I thought that the plants want to be in this symbiotic relationship when they're of medicine and when they have something positive to share and something that we call positive. It's life affirming, it grows life. And then the plants live within the people. There's a transference of the plant, and the human who drinks of the plant shares in that. And people feel like the ayahuasca is then with them for literally forever. It's not at all a weird thing or a scary thing. It's like having a friend that's with you, and some people, if they don't want that friend anymore, they can tell it to be gone and it will be. But otherwise, it really does become part of you. And in that symbiosis, you act out as the shaman what the plants need for them to be able to continue to practice their medicine. As Alberto says, we call the spirits from the plants themselves and from the animals themselves that have this medicine, and we then impart it, or we direct it to the people and their needs. And so I've always seen that as a symbiosis, and I think maybe one of the best definitions of symbiosis.
I've been thinking quite a bit about that regarding some of the powerful people that you meet down at these retreats, these moguls, these creatives that come down there, some of them having to come down with an alias. And then we go back to our home in San Francisco or the Midwest. All the while, we're motivated by this brew or these plant medicines we partake in. And then it turns into physical by us being creatives, whether that be art, whether that be architecturists or architects. Can you kind of explain how the power of these brews working with influencers on our planet, especially in the age of the internet, how powerful that can be, but there being a fine line with like the Chelsea ladies coming down, drinking the brew, having a horrible experience, or I don't know if you've heard of Kentucky ayahuasca, which is not a very good look for the world of ayahuasca and plant medicine. Have you heard of that TV show?
No, I haven't. I haven't heard of that.
Okay, so
No.
it's this former convict, and this is a real show. It's on Vice. He operates out of Kentucky, and he's always having to move his camp because he's operating illegally. And that's not necessarily the best look for practitioners like yourself who are actually doing this honestly. So can you kind of point out like where the perception of ayahuasca is really going to play a role in the Western world specifically?
Yeah, first of all, the idea of the influence is astounding, right? I think when you are an influencer, you influence via your imagination. You have to come up with the idea to create anything. It's not just from nowhere do you get this idea. And so when you've interacted with the plants and the plants have affected the nature of how you imagine, you share the influence of how you imagine with the rest of the world. Like the things I talk about, I was not capable of talking about 15 years ago. I wasn't capable of imagining those ideas. And so when you have this digital medium to share ideas and you're changing ideas because of the plants, the level of influence goes up. And then when you see the responsibility associated with it, what I've always thought was that the medicine is self-selective. And so, shows like that where people are doing things that are illegal, They don't give a good light to that expression at all, but it's showing the world that there's this illegal expression of something that doesn't need to be illegal happening. And I think there it's self-selective. If you decide to go do the illegal thing, that was your decision, and that was your mindset, and that's where you were coming from. There were many other legal options available, and I've always said, make the good decision yourself. Recognize that part of the idea is not just to go and trip. That's not what it is. It's about a medicine, and you want to know who you're drinking it with, why you're drinking it, the when you're drinking it, not like in terms of the time of day, but in your life, like in your life process, why you're going to this experience in the first place. And you can dissociate the substance from the indigenous practices. But you can do the same with any other Western pharmaceutical. What would happen with Western pharmaceutical drugs if you took away the doctor and you just let anybody disperse them however? Right? It'd be chaos. It would be unbelievable chaos. People would be killing themselves all the time with this stuff. And so these plants are unbelievably important, but they're also unbelievably requiring of responsibility and knowledge. And in the case of ayahuasca shamans, really powerful and really quality ayahuasca shamans have 10, 15 years, 20 years of study. How many other Western professions require 10, 15, 20 years of study to be really good at it? Like, very few. It's an incredible specialty, and it was treated that way in the Amazon with an incredible amount of respect and a requirement of dedication to that length of time. And what you saw in that length of time of someone's dedication and respect was that they had a long then history of people who had worked with them. They would have worked with people from all over the jungle with all different kinds of ailments. And if you didn't have a good reputation where your entire reputation was word of mouth, you wouldn't have any success whatsoever as a shaman. You'd be literally considered a charlatan and ostracized from the community. And so I think we're now in a realm of, in a time of personal responsibility where we have to take responsibility for what we're doing and what we're ingesting and how we're treating the nature of these experiences. And so that's where I see it as being self-selecting. And I think if you want really good medicine and you want it to be professional and you want it to be done in a way where you're assuring the quality of the outcome, then, put thought into that about how you would have that experience. And if that requires saving up for it, save up for it. Make it something incredibly special. I didn't find just any hip surgeon when I needed hip replacement. You mentioned the Mayo Clinic. You didn't just say like, hey, the charlatan with a butcher knife down the street redid my shoulder. Yep. Right? And so I think you have to look at it from that perspective. And luckily for me, I came from a Western medical family. And so to me, medicine required a very long, fairly arduous, if not extremely arduous, notion of how you learn it and practice it. My father was a surgeon. My mother was a nurse. And so there is the understanding of what a professional hospital space looks like, what a professional operating room looks like, what a professional treatment looks like, what professional intake forms look like, everything to be in alignment with the law, but also to give sense to those laws. And so when I got involved in sacred plants, we built our center on all of those notions of how you would, organize a medical clinic is the exact same way that we organized around ayahuasca, even though we were considered a tourism facility and we weren't per se practicing medicine. So I think that's where it's your personal decision. So if you want to just say, whatever, roll the dice, go somewhere, I'm not sure I'd recommend that. I think you're putting yourself at tremendous risk. I think shows like that about people who are doing work is ultimately detrimental simply because it's breaking the law and it's not showing a responsible use of the plant within that jurisdiction or within that territory. And I don't think that the plants need that. There are enough places in the world where you can experience this legally, and there are enough people in the world who are doing the work to be able to bring the legal respect to the plants. When we started, you couldn't drink ayahuasca in Costa Rica. You can now legally at a number of centers who put in the work with the government to prove the holistic medicinal qualities of the plants and the reasons to have that as something that they could be licensed for. To see that action, that's what I would support. Those are the kinds of actions that I personally would support. And I think that they're pro the medicine, they're pro the message, they're pro the experience, they're pro the healing, and they're also pro the society that's allowing them and offering them. And I think that makes a lot more sense than, TV shows that are showing this other side of it. That sounds very sensationalized to me. And I think we have to make our own decisions about that. I think, unfortunately, drugs are medicines, and they're misused in the modern world for a lot of reasons that the modern people don't want to admit. And the sacred plants are medicines, and they're not just going and having a drug experience. This idea of separating medicine from drug, I think, is a foolish way of understanding the plants. The plants have a purpose. They've had a purpose through the entirety of our human history. They still have a purpose, and turning them into a drug trip is literally the opposite of their purpose. And so you can strip something of its purpose. Jung used to say, if you take a medicine after the time that you need it, it becomes a poison. I think that concept is smart, and these need to be understood as medicines. They need to be administered in a traditional shamanic form, and they need to be done in a place that's respecting their existence. And what I would like to see in the modern world is for the way the modern world understands compounds and substances, to give these compounds and substances their due right. Like any other compound or substance that gives its due right. That is unfortunate that in a place like America or in Europe, that may take longer for people to ultimately have access to them. But there are studies going on at major institutions right now that are proving the validity of these compounds and these substances. So not just ayahuasca, but psilocybin, cannabis, their validity is being proven in scientific study. And that's the way that those governments and institutions have decided to regulate and understand the idea of a drug. And so I think that's what we need to respect. I think that as a community, what we need to respect. And I think then that really shows the area and the government and the people where you are, that you're coming from a really positive and a really good place. You're not a misfit. You're not trying to cause a disruption. You're not trying to harm anybody. You're actually seeking medicine. You're actually seeking a transformation. You're seeking spirit. You're seeking a psychomagical or a psycho-religious experience that is real for you. The freedom of religion all around the modern world shows the importance of that. It demonstrates the importance of that. There are groups in the United States that have done the hard work with the U.S. government to be respected as religions, that use ayahuasca as a sacrament. Kudos to them, and finding the way to fund those abilities to show the government and to take those cases to that level that they can be respected. And those would be the people that I choose to support.
I'm going to have you break down the importance of the calling to ayahuasca, because I think most people who find it and get so much out of it, they've all had a calling. The mother ayahuasca has to come calling for you. I've always wanted to tell you this story, and it's awesome that I'm able to tell it to you in person, because mine happened through fate. Okay. In 2010, I used to be a criminal. I was a triple felon. I got arrested 15 times between the age of 18 and 23. And I was in jail. This is in 2010. I was in Hennepin County Jail up in Minneapolis, facing more charges. And this kid, also named Nick, who's going away for 20 years, gave me this book. I asked him one morning at breakfast. He was always so calm and spiritual and always meditating up in his room. And I asked him, man, what is going on? How are you this peaceful? You're going away for 20 years. And he brings me down this book the following morning called DMT, a Spirit Molecule. I read it, and it changed my life. But mainly the early parts of the book were very specific about the magic of the Amazon jungle. So me knowing I'm about to face countless more years of probation where I won't be able to leave the country, I held on to what that book told me. And then In the fall of 2014, I got off probation. I was on probation for 9 years, and I got off probation. All my felonies were dropped down to gross misdemeanors. So now I can get my passport. I leave court and I go downstairs and I get my passport, and then it comes in the mail in December. And then the first week of January, I had heard you on, it might have been Aubrey's podcast, Aubrey Marcus. I reach out to Aubrey. Him and I had contact prior. I reach out to him. I said, Aubrey, man, I got my first ever passport. I'm ready to fly out. Where do I need to go, man? Tell me where to go. He says, he gets back to me the following morning. I'm walking into work. I'm reading the message. There's this weirdo named Hamilton Southern. You got to go down to Blue Morpho. And so at this point, my ball's rolling, and I still financially wasn't able to go. And the following month, I'm still, because we live up in the Northern Hemisphere, we have this thing called seasonal affective disorder. It affects a lot of us. We don't get as much rays from the sun. We get a little bit sadder come winter time. And I'm just facing the depths, man, the pits. And my wife sets up this appointment with this Brazilian psychic named Jurema Silva. And she got this feeling halfway through my hour-long session with her. She didn't know me from Adam, might I add, and she didn't know that I read the book DMT or Spirit Molecule 5 years prior. She had no clue. She didn't know I just got my first ever passport. A month prior, I was reaching out to Aubrey to come see you guys down in Peru. She gets this feeling halfway through the session, and she writes it, and then she circles it, and she stars it, and then she spins it around, slides it across the table. It said Peru on it. So then that really told me, okay, this must be that calling they talk about. I guess I got to go now. So sure enough, I ended up a few months later booking my travel, going down to Blue Morpho in August of 2015. That was my personal calling. Some people's stories I've heard way more dramatic renditions of a similar story, some not so much. That was my personal calling. Could you kind of break down the importance of the calling for people to come to the medicine?
Sure. I mean, first, I just want to say what an amazing story, and thank you for sharing it with me. I mean, that's just an unbelievable story. And what I love about the story is that there's redemption in the story for you, from going from a place where you were obviously dealing with different kinds of criminality and the system associated with that, and coming out of that, and then finding the nature of that redemption. I think that is such an important story for people who feel like they have no place in society anymore because they ended up doing things or getting caught that caused them a serious problem. So first of all, thank you for sharing that, because that is unbelievable, I think, for other people to hear that there is redemption beyond even our own understanding and where it can come from after what we faced in the difficulties of our life, whether it's with law or whether it's just tragedy and loss, or whether it's just our own brain and our own brain chemistry that's giving us difficulties, whatever, there is that ability for redemption. And I think everybody deserves it. And in terms of the calling, all I can say, just like you, is that the calling comes when you know it. And it's not this self-created experience that's just, oh, I'm going to go do this thing. I mean, people can do that, and if they want to, fine. But it's really, I think, something that comes to you. Most people talk about it as some kind of synchronicity, some kind of dream, some kind of understanding that comes to them, a friend randomly sharing with them something about it coming into their life at the right time. And I think that is the calling. It's when you have that recognition that this is right for you, and there's something that's connected to it that's more than just, I made this decision, like I woke up this morning to have a cup of coffee. Like, did I choose tea or coffee? Like, it's not as a simple choice as that. And I think that you also don't want to make the calling, that idea of the calling, so foreign to somebody that they can't relate to it, and they think like, well, I never had the calling, I'll never have the calling. If you're having that thought, that might be the calling too. Mm-hmm. Like, you could flip the argument and say, if you're thinking you're not having the calling, but you're thinking about it, that is the calling. Mm-hmm. And it's in you when you know that this is the time for you to make that leap in your life, to really expand your life. I think that's the easiest way to understand it. You're going to the ceremony, and you're going to this medicine and this substance, and this tea in the case of ayahuasca, to have a kind of transformative experience, and you're saying yes to that experience. and you're saying yes to the plant that's giving you that experience. And I think then you're coming at it from the perspective to really get the most out of it. Like you said earlier, to have that really like open yes attitude. I want this experience. Yes to the purge. Yes to the fact that it might be so intense. You've never had anything happen that intense in your life. That ability to say yes to that, I think, is the key. And I think that's where that calling comes from. And then you can say yes to the experience, you can say yes to the medicine, you can say yes to the ayahuasca, and then you can really get the most out of it.
The let go, the absolute let go, man, that was so tough for me. I'll never forget Matt Toussaint coming up to me after my second night. I thought nothing was happening. I didn't really break through, or I didn't break through at all. And like I was in the middle of the room, I couldn't focus. My ADD is going crazy. He's like, okay, let's put you on the outside of the room by Big Ed and Cheryl. Let's just keep you over there. And we're going to drink a little bit more tonight. And we're going to come and work on you. And that was the night that obviously Ganesh came through. And sure enough, they broke me through and that put my dick in the dirt and helped me realize that I don't know anything. I am at peace with not knowing anything and just saying yes to the situation, to the circumstance, and just being okay with it was kind of my biggest aha moment with the medicine at first. And then since drinking multiple times, going on multiple retreats, just the let go has been so huge because it carries over into my everyday life where, Nick, you might not have the answers and it's okay. You don't know what's coming tomorrow and it's okay. Just being in the moment. You don't know if you're going to get that email back and it's okay. You work on getting an interview with Hamilton Souther for 2 years and then finally it happens, by being patient.
For sure. I think having the understanding of letting go into the uncertainty is the biggest freedom you could possibly ever give yourself. We face this ever uncertainty. Everybody faces uncertainty.
Before I let you go, can you just break down for the listeners the difference between Mestizo tradition and Shipibo tradition, if you know?
The best I can give to that is that the Shipibo tradition is entirely indigenous. And so unless the Shipibo tradition is bringing in elements outside of that, you're working with entirely indigenous culture that has really no Roman Catholic mythological influence to it. And then when you're dealing with Mestizo culture, there is this extra Roman Catholic influence associated with the practice. In the case of the truly indigenous Shipibos that have not brought in any of that other aspect of their practice, you're dealing with a mindset that is 100% and fully associated to their linguistics and their understanding of the spiritual world and their understanding of consciousness. And so are obviously having an indigenous experience that's very authentic, but is also limited in its own right compared to where you're coming from, because you're coming from this understanding in life that is entirely influenced by the information age and all of these other mythologies and all of these other expressions of consciousness that you've tapped into and that you've been a part of. And then in the Mestizo traditions, you have then a wide variety of practices based on their beliefs associated to those mythologies. And that's where I think in the Mestizo traditions, you need to really find people that you click with and that you jive with, that you understand, and that come with a high reputation, because there's a potential for charlatanism there. There's a potential for fakery. Someone could be just making it up. And so I think if you're in the Mestizo traditions, you want to have there be enough of the authenticity of the indigenous and enough reputation there to know you're going to a good place.
Hamilton, if you were to pitch Donald Trump to come to Blue Morpho, how would you approach it?
We're going to pitch Donald Trump.
Be brutally honest, bro. We need to hear this.
How would I approach it? I mean, I think I would just approach it the same way I approach the rest of all the questions, which is that this is the truth of this experience, and if you have the calling, come and have it. Simple as that. If you've had the calling, come and have this experience. It'll change your life. It'll change how you understand what you're doing. I'm not so critical of what everybody's doing in the world right now.
Hmm.
You know, that's, I think, the beauty of the plants. I see time in a much larger uh, expanse than just the immediate. And the immediate is a kind of chaos that we're going through. But in the history that I've learned, this chaos has been something that has been expressed over and over and over again. I've been asked a lot of times, should all the world leaders drink ayahuasca? And the answer to that is only if they've had the calling. The world
Hmm.
is exactly where it's supposed to be. And so, if world leaders have the calling to participate in these experiences, what I think is that they won't continue to think and act in the same way after the experiences.
Hmm.
I think, you know, there's a choice inside the experience too. And it's important to also understand that if you're super power hungry and you're super wealth hungry, and those are your focuses, and you're very egoic about that, ayahuasca may not quote unquote fix that. Ayahuasca may feed that in you. That's the whole point of the darkness. That's where like the bad shamans come from, and the ones that perpetrate the nature of that darkness. And so I don't think it's for everybody, and I don't think it's for all the world leaders, and I don't think it's the magic thing to solve all of the world problems. I think it's an influencer, and it's part of the ever changing and evolving landscape. And the political climate is, you know, it's intense right now, and it's conflict oriented. And going back to earlier in the interview, the idea of that cruelty, and there's a ton of it being expressed all over the world. And so, what I think is for the people that have this calling, and if you're in politics or you're in entertainment or you're an influencer in some kind of way and you feel this calling and you give it a legitimate shot, come to it to open up your heart, come to it to the medicine, come to it to see that there's more going on in the world and in consciousness. And then from that, do a better job.
Hmm.
Do a better job for your role and your service to society and the community, which is what this is. All of these roles are ultimately about. So, you know, taking it out of the political space. I remember a doctor who came early on who didn't have any spiritual connection whatsoever, true
Hmm.
atheist through and through. And by night 4 of the ceremonies, he realized that he was a mechanic and didn't know anything about healing. And he was a hand surgeon and a famous hand surgeon. And he
Yeah.
realized he was a mechanic and that he didn't understand anything about healing, and that he opened up to the universe to teach him about healing.
Hmm.
And he had a spiritual awakening that took him beyond being just a hand mechanic. And he admitted it that way, and he expressed it that way. That's the kind of person in that space that had an opportunity to make that change. And so, if you're in any kind of position where you influence, whether it's local politics or whether it's any kind of influencer in entertainment or any other field where you can, you know, understand that through your own imagination and through your own creativity, you could have an experience that would be life expanding for you, and then that influence would be positive for other people, and that you could share that positivity with them, and that sounded like a good message to you, then I think you're ready for this kind of experience.
Yeah, I had to go through a paradigm shift because I used to think that ayahuasca was the end all be all. And then as I continued to work with it, I started to understand that it was just one tool in a world filled with multiple tools. Because conscious breath practice can be just as powerful if you use it in the correct way.
There's lots of tools, and the idea is open up to more tools, open up to more expansive tools that make us more positive, more helpful, better people to the rest of the world. You know, I think that's really the core message to anybody, and it doesn't matter who they are or where they are. And I would give that opportunity of redemption to anybody, regardless of the number of haters in the world. If I wanted the redemption for myself, I would want to give it to other people as well, whether that's just to forgive problems that you had with family, or whether it's to take it all the way to having had problems with society. To me, it's irrelevant. Like, I think everybody can ultimately find redemption, and is that should be available. And I wish we would have a more forgiving overall collective and overall society.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have recently gotten obviously we know of the what happened with Matt down there with his what it was with his work visa, correct? Just a little mishap from 2015. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, Matt is on his journey, and we came to an understanding in his journey that, the next step for Matt was to move beyond our facility,
Hmm.
just working with the tourism, and we wanted him to go deeper into his own journey and
Hmm.
deeper into his own overall experience. I thought it was a key test of virtue in Matt's
Yep.
apprenticeship, and that in his learning, it wasn't just be here and stay here forever. That ultimately wasn't my destiny either. My
Hmm.
destiny, even though I founded the place, ultimately took me in other directions for periods of time.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that our bond or our friendship or our agreements or our relationship is severed in any kind of way. On the contrary, very recently, we were just discussing, I mean, just a few days ago, we were just discussing Matt's next moves
Hmm.
and staying connected and bonded in the space of the medicine. And, what we want from anybody who works with us is to have the opportunity to continue to learn and grow. Often at our center, that becomes very repetitious because
Hmm.
we are holding this week of a retreat for people.
Hmm.
And when you're really in the jungle doing this work, it's different kinds of patients bringing different kinds of scenarios and problems week in, week out. And it's not just the ayahuasca plants, there's a lot of other plants associated with it. And so we thought it was important as a collective and also and individually for Matt to have the opportunity to expand in his practice.
Hmm.
And that was his test of virtue, and that we wanted him to have that. And I think he's confronted it with an incredible amount of courage and has come out on the winning side of it. And for that, we give him an unbelievable big hug and huge round of applause.
And that's why I bring it up, because I know it through and through as well. And we've recently gotten him an opportunity, and how we perceive it is it's the wings of Blue Morpho spreading out even further. Your influence that you've had on so many lives are now able to change even more through Matt.
Absolutely, through Matt and many others too. We've had lots of apprentices through my time working as a shaman. I've had lots of apprentices now, well over 20, and they all reach different stages of development, and most of them are still involved in medicine practices in one way or another. Some made it to the level or rank of maestro, and others didn't, and that's also common and accepted. That you have this opportunity, and sometimes you make it, and sometimes you don't, but everybody has ultimately benefited, I think, from those experiences and then have now continued to share in that growth and development with the rest of the people that they interact with. And to us, that's what this is really about. It was never about just a single collective. We were never building a commune.
Mhm.
We were never trying to just grow us here. The idea was for people to come, have an experience, and go and take that experience, having been transformed from that experience, and share it with others through their life itself. And I think everybody, including Matt, who's been at Blue Morpho and has worked with us, has ultimately come away with that.
That's kind of where when you've gone to the right place, the right center, is when it's non-egoic, when it's unconditional love. I remember a story, and I reflect on this quite a bit in regards to losing animals. Terry told me a story about having to leave her dog behind to come work at Blue Morpho. And it was how she told me that story, where it was like, oh my gosh, this woman has found unconditional love in herself and in everything, being able to leave her pet behind.
Absolutely. I mean, the sacrifice to the medicine is real. It's life changing, and that includes the positive and negative in the previous life that you were in before. And, all I can say is that we've been blessed to have had unbelievably dedicated people come and work with us. Like, just blessed. The level of dedication that the people have shown comes from a true love and a transformational experience that they had with us. And then that level of dedication is unmatched. I mean, there's no way to describe it. Terry, Matt, there's been so many people who've shown us that dedication and represented that. And we'll continue to support them in their medicine journey literally forever, whether it's at our center or continuing to share the love and the expression of that medicine beyond us. Like I say, we're not the end all of everything. We're just a locus that people come for change. I thought of us as an epicenter for change and to embrace that change and embrace that evolution. And for a lot of people who come to us and work with us for a period of time, it's necessary for them to go and expand their horizons beyond
Yep.
just here.
Mhm. And that's kind of because my draw back to Blue Morpho the second time was, I won't lie, it was Matt. It wasn't Malcolm. It wasn't Loretta. It was Matt and Sammer in a nutshell. And being able to keep a connection with Matt and to hear the same thing come out of his mouth with how he understands the situation, with how you're breaking it down, is so insightful, because it allows us to kind of keep this bond and this relationship that the medicine has created for us going.
And that's exactly what it should do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that's the understanding of embracing the change and embracing the idea that we're this big fractal of light that's expanding. Instead of being so isolated in this us and them argument, it's not an us and them argument. The medicine needs to break that argument down and just make it an us. It's an us and us going places and us working with people and us interacting and us traveling and us sharing ideas and us in that collective vibe. And, you know, we've become global. We went through a whole period of time of globalization, and now there's this huge fixation on political identity. We're global. It's that simple. And so, you know, it's not just one location. It's not these guys are better than those guys. It's where can you have a safe experience? Where can it be professional? Where can you get out of it your reasons for being there? Where can you find friendship, bond, and potentially even love in the nature of that experience, whether it be spiritual love or a partnership of love? I mean, we've had people who've come here that ended up working through their personal stuff and then found relationships and got married and had kids and stuff, all from the experiences that they had with us. And I think that's what the medicine has been teaching from the very beginning, is that this moves beyond the tribalization of us. It moves beyond the us and them. It moves beyond the notion that these guys are right and these guys are wrong. And it can be broken down really simply into a level of quality and professionalism. Like, are you having a quality experience, and are you being changed in a way that you can recognize? It doesn't have to be quantified in 1 to 10. It's, can you recognize that positive influence that you've received, that medicine influence that you've received, and then be able to maintain that and share that. And so, you know, we've always based our work on just fundamental honesty and just being, you know, clear and straight up about what we're doing. And then that translates in the ceremonies. But I didn't think in spirit there was any time for that dishonesty. Like, people would ask me, could a spirit lie to you? I'd be like, well, it's really truthfully lying to you. It's honestly lying to you. It's like, ha, 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 ha vibe. Not like, oh, hey, dude, what's up? Like, hey, we're right here talking, right? So I'd be like, if there's some spirit that's like trying to pull a fast one on you, you should know it. It's a thing. It's expressing itself. And so, you know, I think with like I said, the people that have worked with us and the bonds that other people in our community have made with them, those should continue. And that's what continues to spread the love and continues to spread the real message of what we've always been about.
My man, what's next for Hamilton and Blue Morpho?
Expansion and growth. You know, Blue Morpho is growing. I'm growing. I'm really glad for that. In the last 5 years, I think I've learned more than I've learned in the previous whole life that I lived. The idea is to fully embrace the evolution of us as an organization, and also personally in my own journey of being alive, continue to learn forever. You know, I don't think that just because you're considered a master of a kind of art, that takes away the need or the desire to continue to learn and grow. And so I just see that as our continued evolution. You know, we started out talking about the idea of the expansions here and growing the ceremonial house and having larger ceremonies and getting into sustainable energy and sustainable food production. And I think that that's really our overall goal. We're also launching a decentralized entertainment platform, which will help people in the creation and the sharing of digital content. And, you know, I think that that's really exciting as well. I think that there's a very thin veil between this etheric, digital sharing of ideas and then the idea of the medicine itself. And so I got really interested in technology about 10 years ago. So we're involved in these sustainable food production and sustainable energy projects, as well as making digital content easier and better for people to share, and making that simpler, sharing that with more people, and continuing to spread the message and the love that we started with.
Have you ever seen the movie Avatar?
I have seen the movie Avatar.
What did you think when you saw it?
I thought that it was an incredible movie. I thought it shared an unbelievable number of shamanic themes. I thought that the people that wrote it had a very clear message and explained it in a really simple way. And I thought the message was beautifully articulated. And then I saw many, many influences of ayahuasca shamanism within the movie itself.
Well, didn't James Cameron and some of his executive producers come down to Blue Morpho?
No, that's an urban legend. That's an
Oh,
urban legend that those guys came down. There are guys that worked on that movie that have been with us, but it wasn't those guys. But
it
there's a
wasn't them.
number of guys that worked on that movie that came down here, and they were influenced by the ayahuasca, and they had a hand to play in the description and the effects and digital effects that are in the movie, and a
Mhm.
nature of how that those shamanic themes and those themes of consciousness and the idea of sharing that consciousness got depicted. James Cameron and his friends are the ones who, or partners are the ones who wrote the movie itself, but the nature of the special effects and depiction of that was, in some ways influenced by our work.
Dude, you guys influenced one of the sickest movies of all time, one of the most profiting movies of all time. You guys influenced it.
Well, I think that's the idea of sharing medicine and love with people. The people that
Yep.
were part of that are still close friends. Um, they, there were a number of people that worked for that I met over the years that worked for Lucas,
Yeah.
and Lucas is special effects house. And so, for a period of time before that was sold to Disney, um, I knew these people and we shared ideas, and they really bonded with the understanding that I went looking for Yoda, and that's what I was looking for. I was looking for a real, master of something beyond the known world. And in finding that in Don Julio became a place of bond for all of us. And so, I think that I mean, kind of it's hard to put into perspective. That was not what I was thinking when we were holding ceremonies, that certain elements of our ceremonies and visions would end up in a lot of different films. But the truth is that I think a lot of films and movie franchises have ultimately been influenced, and I would hope people would think that that was positive in the way that they were depicted.
Hamilton, Blue Morpho does it correctly, and I know this from my own personal experience. I am forever indebted to you and your team. You are the reason for Stationary Astronaut as well. Beyond the movie Avatar, you're the reason for Stationary Astronaut as well. It's a complete oxymoron. I came up with it while I was laying in a mat in the Heliconia ceremony hall, and I was like, wait a minute, I'm here, but I'm out there. So
There
yeah,
it
that's
is,
that's where Stationary
surfing outer
Astronaut came from.
space.
Yeah, bro. So
Absolutely.
I really have to thank you, and I will be coming down and seeing you here in the near future. We'll line it up.
Absolute pleasure. It's incredible talking with you. Thank you for sharing all of your stories and the influence that we've had in your life and with this show. And it's a pleasure to be on it. I'm happy to come on and talk with you whenever you like. And to all of your fans and our fans, please come down and see us. We love to have you come down and have a beautiful time.
Thank you, brother.